Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Global Affairs Unfiltered. I'm Jack Stockwell. I'll be here for an hour this morning with plenty to fill the hour with what's going on everywhere as the web continues to be spun and as we continue to see the collapse of Western hegemony-powered control over the planet, as it should well be done. I will be talking about several things, key issues in various countries that immediately affect what's going on here in this country. I have been asked a number of times, why don't I address more domestic issues? And I find domestic issues follow international issues by a few weeks to a few months, and that what is going on worldwide right now is of such importance that what is going on domestically can change any minute based on which way the winds are blowing around this planet. So there are some things that are going on I find to be hilarious, things that are going on I find to be heartbreaking. But the hilarious comedy of today is the three leading coalition of the willing partners meeting today at number 10 Downing Street. The UK's Keir Starmer, France's Macron, Germany's Merz is there, as was the leading clown on the planet, Volodymyr Zelensky, trying to give approval for the next attempt to keep him in power and the war going. And I want you to see this in its proper context. The coalition of the willing, the E3, wants to expand out to the E5. It's like a Saturday Night Live episode. And so they're meeting at number 10 Downing, as I said, and Zelensky is there, and they're figuring out whatever last little steps they can make, while the law of attrition is killing every last possible Ukrainian combatant on the battlefield. Thousands are surrounded with the command to surrender or be destroyed. And here you have these three leaders following the command of their superiors, which is comprised of the oligarchs of their countries, as well as what's coming out of the City of London and Wall Street and Washington, D.C., to continue the war with Russia. So afterwards, which is, I think they're, 8 hours, 9 hours ahead of us. So it's in the afternoon over there now. They probably had this meeting. Zelensky announced that he's going to share the new agenda that they come up with, this tagged 20-point plan, with Washington today. And the key poison pill designed to sabotage any possible end to the fighting. And one thing to keep in mind is I think President Trump is very much committed to the end of the fighting. But what they want to do, Zelensky has declared once again, as recently as yesterday, Ukraine is not going to give up any land. Which is just absolutely hilarious, because they can't take it back. They can't possibly take it back. They've been trying to take it back, but their butts are being kicked every time they turn around towards the Dnieper River. So Zelensky says this: the mood of the Americans in principle is for finding a compromise. Of course, there are complex issues related to the territory, and a compromise has not been found there yet. Mr. Zelensky, there's not going to be a compromise. There's not going to be a tit for tat. There's not going to be, all right, we keep this, but we'll give you that. That just isn't going to happen, because the war is over. The Russians won. And in order to protect the ethnic Russians who are living in the Ukraine, they're not going to back down, which is why those areas have now become part of the Russian Federation. And Russia isn't about to give them up. So Zelensky then flew to, or has flown to Brussels to meet with NATO and EU leaders. And this is like an ongoing skit as Saturday Night Live. Like it's done. It's over with. And yet he says, I think the plan will be ready for tomorrow. This 20-point plan that the E3, the Coalition of the Willing, and Zelensky are putting together. And he says, we'll discuss it again, and then we'll send it over to the United States. Now, of course, a key issue there is whether EU countries are going to put funding Ukraine in the same category as running up the national credit card for the sake of the financial derivatives bubble that is hanging over top of everybody, not just us. And so the high cost just to extend precious little time for this bubble or the Zelensky comedy show has given a lot of the EU countries a pause for thought, meaning that while Zelensky has made no mention of how this coalition is going to address President Trump's latest observations, there was surely a matter of some concern in this session that's going on today in London. And back on December 7th, Trump says that while Russia has the ability to take all of Ukraine, Russia was fine with Trump's plan. And Trump's plan, of course, is that Russia kind of stops where it is now. And then he went on to say that Zelensky had apparently not actually read the U.S. peace proposal, and it disappointed him. And Zelensky's offer that he was ready to fly to the United States if the president is ready for such a meeting sounded like an offer that Trump will likely refuse, just as he did a week ago. And it's just the silly, ongoing efforts on the part of Western Europe in whatever remaining heartbeat exists in the coalition of the willing to continue the war with Russia. It's only going to continue to destroy thousands of Ukrainian servicemen per week. There are Russians being killed, but not nearly the ratio that used to be there. Because as Putin about 6 months ago said, we're not man to man anymore on the battlefield. We can do it from the air because of all of the drones they're using. And the Ukrainians are using drones against their own people who look like they're going to desert or turn around and retreat. I mean, the absolute insanity of this kind of an ongoing operation, I think, is equaled or bettered only by the insanity of the world's allowing the genocide in Gaza to continue. I'll get to that before too long. Now, an update on Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she hasn't gone away. She's going to still be in office for another month. But over the past couple of days, President Trump's meltdown over Marjorie Taylor Greene has grown to some new highs. She was interviewed on 60 Minutes last Sunday. And her first since announcing her resignation last month. And in it, she sharpened her attack on Trump's hypocrisy about America first. And she just absolutely decried his loyalty within his party. And she said this: I watched many of my colleagues go from making fun of him, making fun of me constantly for supporting him, to when he won the primary in 2024. And then they all started kissing his ass and decided to put on a MAGA hat for the first time. Republicans are terrified, she said, to be seen opposing Trump. I think they're terrified to step out of line and get a nasty Truth Social post on them. She said they're all watching what has happened to her. So then she says he passed a crypto bill that helped out all the crypto donors. He has served Israel's interest. even attacking Iran. He has served big pharma. For an America First president, the number one focus should have been domestic policy, and it wasn't. Then immediately on Monday, December 8th, yesterday, Trump's meltdown began. He posted, he's not done with her. He posted this vicious, rambling diatribe against Green, calling her Marjorie Trader Brown. Green turns brown under stress, he said. And she says, Marjorie is not America First or MAGA, because nobody could have changed her views so fast. Her new views are those of a very dumb person. He even proceeded to attack the 60 Minutes host for interviewing her. President Trump, please. So in her response later on yesterday, she kept focus on Trump's support for Israel and continuing illegal wars, illustrating why this has been such a major fissure for MAGA and for Trump's base. She said, I am America First. Thank you for your attention to this matter. She posted that on her X account yesterday. Then she included her post a screenshot from AIPAC Tracker, which showed her listed as $0 in AIPAC contributions, next to Trump, who has over $230 million in contributions. Now you can go on the internet and see this for yourself, who AIPAC is giving money to and how much. Under her name, zero. She has accepted $0 from AIPAC. President Trump has received over $230 million from AIPAC. Then later, yesterday, she posted this. This week, we are voting on National Defense Authorization Act that funds our military, and it's, once again, filled with America's hard-earned tax dollars used to fund foreign aid and foreign countries' wars. Then she included a picture of a portion of the NDAA bill, which shows a major increase in funding for military expenditures to what country? Yes, Israel. She said funding foreign aid and foreign wars is America's last and beyond excuse anymore. I would love to fund our military, but refuse to support foreign aid and foreign militaries and foreign wars. Wow. Marjorie Taylor Greene, you have my respect and I salute you. Funding foreign aid and foreign wars is America last, not America first, according to Marjorie Taylor Greene. So with the 20-point peace plan, the 28-point peace plan, the Israeli Hamas peace plan, the transatlantic waves have almost reached a tsunami level of freakout. Now, on top of all those plans of the U.S.'s national security strategy paper, really being unprecedented. I didn't have time to get into that very much yesterday, but I'll talk about that a little bit now, because if the world geopolitical position wasn't already confusing, it's going to be even more now, because while Russia and China have had rather calm, moderate responses to this new national security strategy, with Russia even saying that they can live with it, or something like that. The freak out on the side of the Europeans, understandably, is gigantic, because if you extrapolate out of this national security paper, it's simply, I mean, you can see the U.S. completely withdrawing all support for the Ukrainian war. And given the fact that this new strategy paper that just came out is a very mixed bag, it's almost a potpourri written by different authors, mixing ending the NATO expansion, which of course translates into the NATO membership for Ukraine being completely out of the question. And without the United States, there's no way the Ukraine can possibly join NATO. But on the other side, the emphasis on the Western Hemisphere is not nice at all. The emphasis on Asia is very big. So the tone on China is more moderate. With Russia, it's actually not mentioning it as a major adversary at all. But in this national security paper, Western Europe is harshly attacked. And on some points, I think you cannot really say that they're wrong. But if Europe continues like it has been, it will be totally unrecognizable 20 years from now. And it faces civilizational Eurasia with some very strong wording. But on the other hand, given the fact that both sides are committing actions which are really not democratic Republican virtues, it's more like the two sides are sitting in a glass house throwing stones at each other. And when you have two sides in a glass house throwing stones, what you have is a bunch of broken glass. So one comparison which is made is that the tone against Europe, and I'm still talking about this national security strategy paper that just came out. It's rather exhaustive. But I think it's an answer to a recent paper published in Russia on Russia's new security structure. Well, it called for us to do the same thing. And a year ago, remember when J.D. Vance, what he had said at the Munich Security Conference a year ago, and one person, when Vance said, we just aren't all that interested in Europe anymore. And the proverbial, you can hear a pin drop. One person answering is the former head of the Munich Security Conference, who said that this was very heavy wording. But who was it? Who was it who demanded inclusion of Ukraine in NATO in the first place? The main thing that Russia says is not going to happen. Ukraine is not coming into NATO. Who was the first outfit, really, of any subsequent political power that demanded the inclusion of Ukraine in NATO? It was us, the United States, back in 2008. Now, what about the political democratic culture that is quickly eroding here, which includes minorities, which they're taking care to avoid polarization. They don't want to demonize their political opponents. But naturally, all of this is applicable to what Trump is doing inside the United States. And this is a serious rift, because you now have two rifts. One is the new security strategy paper, and then naturally the rift over this 28-point program is still there. I think it's a mild thing to say that the transatlantic relationship has not been this bad since maybe the end of World War II. In any case, there's this major freakout going on because the EU is dying. NATO is dying. The transatlantic relationship between Western Europe and the United States is dying. This is such a critical time to be alive in the midst of all these things, to observe this. And I think if you look now, well, let me say this first. Other elements to be emphasized about this new U.S. security strategy paper is that it wants to increase U.S. military presence in the Asia-Pacific region, with a heavy emphasis on the so-called First Island chain, which goes from Japan over Taiwan to the Philippines. And this is relevant in the context of the recent freakout that's going on between Japan and China over Takaichi's remarks about Taiwan. that Taiwan is primarily only mentioned in this strategy paper. Taiwan is really only mentioned as a center for semiconductor production. But the second aspect is this direct access to the second island chain. So the focus on Latin America is the strongest in one sense because it insists on implementing its preeminence in the region again, for which any hostile foreign influence has to be stopped. And this is what Trump is calling a corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. So as I said, the situation in Europe is just in unprecedented turmoil. Kirill Dmitriev says there's panic in the European Union because Elon Musk, who was in his own fight with the European Union because the EU fined his firm 120 million euros for lack of transparency. Whereupon Musk then called the EU the Fourth Reich. Then Sikorski, the Polish foreign minister, completely flipped out against Elon Musk. So it has so many facets. Merz, von der Leyen met Sunday because the Belgian government is still demanding guarantees from the entire European Union in case these Russian funds are being used for any financing of Ukraine, because they're still debating on this. Brussels doesn't want to release the hundreds of millions of euros they're holding on behalf of Russian investments, because then nobody's investments will be safe. But at the same time, these European Union leaders are trying to force Brussels into letting that money go. And then Brussels comes out and says, well, we want guarantees from every single member of the European Union that if we let this money go and we get stuck with a tab, that they're all going to come up with the money to recover it. And they want the money for what? For the financing of Ukraine. Where's the money going to? Where's the money going that's going to Ukraine? Well, some of it actually goes to the continuation of the Ukrainian government, since internal financing is probably completely upside down. But then again, the rest of it is going for the Lamborghinis in Monaco. So supposedly Merz is the only one who's promised a guarantee to Brussels. All the Europeans, the rest of them haven't. So Merz is quite generous in throwing German taxpayers' money into the wind. Now, Norbert Röttgen, I've only first learned about him, who used to be one of the worst warmongering Atlanticists, called this policy document a second turning point. The first turning point is when Scholz called out the change because of the beginning of the Ukraine war. So this fellow Röttgen says this is now a second turning point, which is an outrageous attempt to interfere in the internal affairs of the European states. They want to change the political landscape, according to the guidelines of the MAGA movement here in America, to cooperate with the internal enemies of the liberal democracies in Europe. And in Germany, that's the AfD, the AfD, the alternative, the MAGA party, the German MAGA party, the Trump party. So one of Napolitano's guest weekly is Karen Kwiatkowski. And what she has to offer always makes sense every time. But in an interview with Sputnik, she says this new security doctrine that I've been talking about means a decision by the United States to completely withdraw out of the Ukrainian war. Now you've got all of these dynamics floating around out there, bumping into one another. And so coming to trying to understand this is the fact that the Ukraine war, as I say every time I got a microphone in front of me, is in its final phase. And with the United States announcing that they are no longer committed to Ukraine through this new security doctrine, and the situation on the battlefield being completely just a question of a very short period of time as to how long the Ukrainian army can hold out. The panic is not only the rift with the United States, but what are they going to do with the Ukraine? So, as I said, today, December 9th, began with the leaders of the UK, France, and Germany in London, where they're meeting with Zelensky, or have met with Zelensky, or currently meeting with Zelensky. And they want to discuss how to prevent a peace agreement along the Trump-Putin view, which goes all the way back to the Anchorage, Alaska meeting, that both Witkoff and Lavrov have said, no, that dynamic is still alive. We're still moving in that direction. And so the EU is denouncing this Trump-Putin, not pause, but a Trump-Putin curveball thrown to the heart of the EU as a Russian victory. Well, yeah. So then the big question, are they going to go for the last move of desperation? I think that's what they're talking about in London today, the seizure of the Russian assets. And I have reported, as many others on the internet have reported, what the Russians' response to that will be. And the Russians have said, listen, we got more control of more European investments than you have of us. And you take that money, you can kiss all that other stuff goodbye. So the situation inside the European Union has reached an absolute. I don't know how long this can go on, because Merz and Macron and Starmer are desperate to increase the E3 to the E5. The E3, France, Great Britain, and Germany, they want to go to the E5 and include Poland and Italy. And I told you what the foreign minister of Italy had to say the other day. Let's just go ahead and attack Russia now. So, what insanity. So, on the other hand, getting the E3 to go to the E5 by including Poland and Italy. On the other hand, you got Viktor Orban and his foreign minister accusing Brussels of preparing for war with Russia. Orban said that they've made the decision already. He said that at a big rally this last Saturday in some town in Hungary, accusing the EU of trying to draw NATO into a war with Russia. Well, what kind of a surprise is that? Well, it actually isn't. Now, according to several releases, Merz, who's running around like a madman all over Europe and the Middle East trying to assume leadership in respect to the Ukrainian situation, he goes to Brussels, canceling a meeting he had planned in Norway, and then he's rushing off to London. He just had come in from Israel, and he's trying to build himself up as the big protector of the West and the big protector of the Ukraine, but has very little substance. What does all this spell out to you? What does all of this mean? When you hear all this stuff and you see this stuff, it's just madness. It's who are these people representing? It's certainly not the population of their countries, because their countries don't want war. I mean, they're sitting in there in the backyard of Russia, the largest nuclear powered country on the planet, a nuclear delivery of nuclear devices, I should say. And so they're scrambling to get support from the EU. More countries are starting to talk like Viktor Orban's Hungary, we don't want war with Russia. Are you out of your mind? Have you not read history? You don't go to war with Russia. So even among the E3, there's no unity. Macron was just on a 3-day state visit to China, just this last week, where it looked, at least on the surface, as if both sides were trying to emphasize the importance of Chinese-French relations. And now, only a few days later, he's making big speeches about the trade deficit between France and China, which can't continue. So now he's threatening hard measures against China if they don't change their trade policy. So while France is trying to strengthen the relationship of the E3 in continuing NATO's war against Russia, Macron is making side deals with China to keep up good China-French relations and trade relationships, which, because the E3 were coming together to decide to trade as one power, Germany is all pissed off now because of what France is doing. And so Vadapol, who's the German foreign minister, who was in China, a couple of weeks ago, and China didn't even make an appointment for him. He just shows up, wanting to talk about German-China relations. And Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, didn't even make a moment for him on the schedule. And so he goes back to Germany with a failed trip, following the fact that the Chinese hadn't made any agenda for him at all, which I said. And then Vadapol comes back and makes outrageous statements about Taiwan. And then the French foreign minister goes to some kind of comments about the inner tensions defining the foreign policy agreements of the E3 that's already starting to fall apart. And now Macron makes these statements about China at a moment when Germany is trying to repair the situation with China. And I'm only reporting this. I'm only going into this because there's absolutely no coordination. There's lots of inconsistency. It's kind of every man for himself among these three countries that are trying to get Poland and Italy to join them. Well, where is this leading? What is going to come of this? Nothing useful. So Vadapol kind of tucks his tail between his legs, makes apologies of German comments about China, and says it's very important for Germany's future to have trade deals with China, and we firmly adhere to the one China policy. Then Wang Wen, the head of the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at the Renmin University in China, says all of this, all of this, including America's new strategy paper, is saying that the China-US game shifts into this long stalemate because both are equally strong, and that's going to remain the case for a long time. So everybody just needs to settle down and accept that fact. Now, how is China able to get away with that? Because they have surpassed the United States to becoming the most productive power on the planet. I remember Nixon's first trip back in the 70s to China to open up China. China back then was relegated to a caveman status. And look at China today. So the possible consequences of this, of what could happen if Belgium capitulates and lets the 170 billion in Russian assets be stolen for payments into the Ukraine. It is so big it could touch an unforeseeable collapse. And this is why, which, and this will only happen with a European-wide guarantee to back up the loss if this doesn't work, and which the other Europeans don't want to give, only MERS. But for MERS to just put the money of German taxpayers into a potential hole without a bottom is also something that might have its own consequences. In any case, this is not the only place where the Damocles sword of potential blowout is hanging over the world. It just never ends. I get up early enough to start reading through all these different news feeds, trying to figure out what I want to talk about. And I try to get what's behind that. And to try to put together some kind of a better concrete understanding of why what is happening, including what's happening with Venezuela. What's happening in this new rift between Japan and China? What's really behind that? And this situation in the Middle East, where Netanyahu has now come out again emphatically ruling out the creation of a Palestinian state. He said Israel is not going to allow the creation of a Palestinian state since the true purpose of the Palestinian state, in his words, was the destruction of the one and only Jewish state. Now you see the pressure that Netanyahu is putting on Herzog, the president of Israel, to give him pardons for his corruption cases. And what did he say? He said, if you don't pardon me, not for my crimes, but for this unjust attack against me, I will burn the whole place down. I was watching news sources this morning, preparing for this show on TV, to see if anybody would cover that. Nobody did. The Israeli press did, because if Netanyahu doesn't have the protection, the legal protection, as Prime Minister of Israel, to hold off these state charges against him and his wife with overwhelming evidence of his guilt that'll send him to prison the rest of his life. He knows he's coming to the end of his term. So he's saying these things to Herzog. Pardon me. President Bush spent time with Herzog. Pardon my special friend, Bibi Netanyahu. Which is all part, of course, of President Trump's Israel First policy. So, when Netanyahu, just this weekend, there will not be a Palestinian state. He said this in context of the official first state visit by MERS to Israel, where MERS was making this dance, where on the one side, weapons deliveries to Israel would continue from Germany. On the other side, it's a fact that Netanyahu is on the arrest warrant of the International Criminal Court for war crimes. So MERS had a press conference in which he tried to change Angela Merkel's dictum that Israel's security is the raison d'etre of Germany, the reason to exist. You know what raison d'etre means. Germany's reason to exist is the security of Israel. Boy, that almost sounds like our raison d'etre here in America. our reason to exist, if you don't read the Constitution of the United States, with the Constitution aside, our reason to exist is the security of the Israeli state. And now he's saying, Merz is saying, that the security of Israel belongs to this unchangeable core question of the relationship between Germany and Israel, and he's trying to get rid of Merkel's raison d'etre. But in substance, really nothing else. I mean, it's quite outrageous because Merz continues his relationship with dear old Bibi as if nothing had ever happened. Well, as you might imagine, that's not going well with the Palestinians. The German head of the German Palestinian Society attacked this in an interview. He said this was a complete disrespect to the Palestinians. He says Merz is totally blind to what's going on in the Gaza and also in the West Bank, where 1,000 Palestinians have now been killed by the Israelis in the West Bank. Radical settlers burning down homes, driving people out of where they have lived for thousands of years, mind you. And the Israeli army, of course, is completely supporting that. And Merz is blind to that. And he is not making a peace policy whatsoever. He says, nope, it's Germany's reason to exist, although he wants to change the wording of that Merkel created. Israel's security. And I think it should be noted that the separation of Gaza is fully continuing. There's now this division into an area that is controlled by the Israeli army. Their construction measures are taking place, which are pushed especially by Jared Kushner. He wants to build at least 10 housing complexes with a preliminary 250,000 Palestinians being able to live there. But who can live there would be strictly controlled so that they have no connection to Hamas whatsoever. Then there's this so-called yellow line, you've heard about that, which divides Gaza between this area, which is for Palestinians and which is for the IDF. And beyond that is the so-called green zone, which is supposedly to be under joint Israeli international control. And then there's the red zone for the Palestinians, where they supposedly can live. But of course, they have to make their homes in the rubble of blown up buildings without any reconstruction. And we're supporting that. Our government is supporting that. And then we send people like Jared Kushner over there to make sure that the ribbon cutting ceremony on the building of these 10 housing complexes, I can't even say it. The stink, the stench, not of just, this yellow line, it's not painted in the dirt. It's not hanging from clotheslines through the middle of Gaza. It's this supposed yellow line that if the Palestinians cross over it, they can be shot on sight by the IDF. They will be shot on sight by the IDF, including children. And the stories that have come out of there from the Doctors Without Borders and the other type of merciful organizations trying to do the best they can in the midst of this genocide are beyond belief. They're so shocking, it's almost impossible to believe. And when you couple that with the absolutely out of control suicide rate of IDF soldiers who can't live with what they've done, that goes back to October 7th. when they were told to kill their own people. No, I'm not just pulling this out of the air. I mean, this is in the Israeli publications where freedom of speech exists. Not so much here anymore, but it sure does there. And look at the conditions in the UK as well as Germany. You make some nasty comment about Israel, you're going to be in jail for a few months. Anyway, you got the red zone and the yellow line and the blue zone and the green zone. I mean, this whole thing is a nightmare. It's totally disgusting. It's clearly meant to lead to a permanent division of Gaza. And it really makes the so-called ceasefire and peace plan a total mockery. It's just something which is completely disgusting. Now, you know your freedoms don't disappear overnight. They disappear piece by piece by piece in some piecemeal attack by the deep state against you. A precedent has been set in Germany now in the Berlin Senate. You've probably heard about this, which will allow the police of Berlin to secretly enter an apartment, install surveillance equipment in apartments without the residents' knowledge. And this goes along with online searches. It goes along with the use of AI and video surveillance of central places. But the idea that they can now go into private apartments and install spy software and then use their body cams in private apartments in the future, I think this may be one of the last steps to a police state if you have ever seen one. There is this scene in The Sopranos, one of the best series I've ever seen. It's not for everybody. It's just so well acted and so well written. It's just, anyway. There's the scene where the FBI gets permission for a wiretap to install in the Sopranos' basement, where they think Tony Soprano has secret meetings with his capos, a microphone. And it goes on for several episodes within that season. But they've got to go to court, they've got to convince the judge, and then they've got to go through all these extra steps of waiting until the Sopranos are gone to act like they are cable repairmen, and they go down in the basement, install the microphone, and get out. Now, I say that in contrast to what the Berlin Senate just passed. Up till now, you can get a wiretap. I mean, that's been around for a long time. That's nothing new. And so instead of just going in and putting a little microphone in a lampshade or a microphone near a couch cushion or something, now they can put in video equipment while you're not present in your home. Now, this is in Germany for now. Then when you come home, you're on video surveillance. Can that happen here? I am sure the legislation is already being written to allow that. All they need is a little 9/11 experience to push it over the edge. So I think I've pretty well covered everything. We've only got 10 minutes here. I just want to say that if you look at this picture as it's outlined, I think you can only describe this as being in complete disarray. Do you know anything about bees? Do you know much about hornets? Do you know what happens in a beehive if you take the queen out of there? I don't know what my fascination with this is. I'm as scared of bees and hornets as anybody else is. But I've watched these videos on YouTube, and you take the queen out of a hive of 7,000 bees, centered around the proclivities of this one female bee laying eggs. You get complete madness, complete disarray, complete breakdown in the entire colony, the hive. I think that's what's going on a world stage right now. The transatlantic rift between the Trump administration and the very liberal circles of Europe, who were previously not just allied, but in bed with the Biden administration, and felt quite comfortable remaining a colony of the United States. And now, obviously, in complete state of turmoil. It's also clear that the Trump administration, J.D. Vance, whoever published and wrote this new strategy paper, definitely wanted to meddle in the internal affairs of Europe in the direction of promoting the so-called right-wing arm of the various governments of Europe. So I think one might be happy that the E3 is going to have an awful lot more wind blowing against them. It still violates the principles of sovereignty. So that's something I would object against. But I think the situation with the Ukraine, in light of this disarray, and one can expect of this gang of E3 with Zelensky, and von der Leyen is there, and Costa is there, and it's probably over with by now. They're going to go for come up with something, some kind of a counteroffensive. Zelensky gave Witkoff the cold shoulder. Witkoff wanted to meet with Zelensky today, but Zelensky turned off and rushed to London instead. And what's going to happen in the Ukraine, I think it's clear that the Europeans may be able to cause some kind of short-term damage, because there's still talk of delivering the Taurus missile to the Ukraine. But that's not sustainable. It's just in total disarray. The situation with Latin America for sure is not welcomed by the majority of people in Latin America. The situation in China looks sort of in limbo. Russia looks much more positive. In any case, to sum it all up, this is a moment of utmost break in an order which has existed in the post-Cold War period. And that's why a new international, this is why countries are flocking to BRICS. This is why countries are dumping their investments in the petrodollar. The smaller companies, or countries with smaller amounts. Hopefully, prayerfully, Russia and Japan, China and Japan will hold on to their American investments. But NATO is falling apart. The European Union is falling apart. The idea of building a new type of European NATO organization that the E3 are talking about by bringing in Poland and Italy is not going to remedy the situation. But what would remedy it is if everybody says this whole effort to create a unipolar world after the end of the Cold War backfired tremendously. It had a blowback in the form that the countries of the global South did not agree with the narrative of the cause of the Ukraine war, because they saw regime change, color revolution, interventionist wars, unilateral sanctions, unfair trade relations, continuing this neo-colonial policy that the West is still trying to hold on to, thinking it's still a unipolar world, when in fact it is now multipolar. Because of the rise of China, there has been for the first time the chance to overcome their colonial status. And many of the countries of the global south are now in the process of reaching the goal of becoming industrialized in the near future. And where is their industrialization coming from? Yes, you guessed it, China and Russia. We will give you these small nuclear power plants. Fourth generation, consumes almost all its own waste, thorium-based. And with just a few of these dotting the land, cheap electricity for everybody. Why wouldn't these countries turn their back on the West and go after this? There's no way they can pay off their IMF debt anyway. But it would lead to the recovery of the economies, even in our country, in European countries. It would help to overcome the migrant crisis in a humane way. It would stop the arms race. It could lead to a diversion of wasted assets in military production where they might actually beat their swords into plowshares, which could be used to build modern infrastructure, modernize transport systems, cooperate in fusion development, go into joint space research and space travel, lift the whole human population to a much higher level of reason. But the colonialists don't like that kind of thinking. It certainly doesn't fit into their paradigm. When you look at what Xi Jinping has put forward in his four initiatives, especially the Global Governance Initiative, what Putin has said repeatedly since 2022, by reiterating, especially in the last several months a few times, calling for a Eurasian security architecture. But in our case, it can only exist if there's development. You can't just say, here's the new set of rules we're going to abide by, and if you don't abide by this new set of rules, it will end very badly for you. You can't say stuff like that. You have to say, here is the new security architecture development, and here is what we're going to do behind it to increase the productivity output of these various nations by providing them with very low-cost electricity. And when you do that, you have fresh water. When you do that, you have new agricultural fields that are just deserts now, but you can turn into gardens. People can make decent living and wages in their own countries that don't have to flock somewhere else as a refugee. To me, it's so simple. I'm in my 31st year of talking about this stuff at K-Talk. And over the years, you begin to recognize patterns, you see threads, you see themes. And the tone of hostility that exists between certain people on the US and the European sides is really like an enemy attitude rather than a formal alliance that was the original concept of NATO. And if you look at all the tension points around the world, and I want to make, emphatically that you have to lead to a new security and development architecture, because also the debt, the incredible debt, can be forgiven in a new security architecture arrangement. Well, that's going to do it for today. Lowell standing by to take over here as I will stop my transmission shortly. Those of you on the stream, thank you again for being a part of this program. If you can like and subscribe. I just got great news regarding my Breaking Health Barriers channel from YouTube. Just got a great offer from YouTube. I'll tell you about it tomorrow on the Health Show. But it's pretty exciting. So I'm going to end the stream first. And thank you. Just keep despair. The best is yet to come.